Hello, my friends. Thank you for joining in. I'm Arvind Achal, and I welcome you all once again to a brand new episode of your favorite show, Live Life XXXL with me, where we inspire and help people get out of their comfort zone, take their lives to the next level, and excel in their lives by expanding their vision and exploring all the possibilities. My guest today is Dr. Kirk Mayhew from Trinidad and Tobago, from the West Indies. Yes, all you cricket fans, whosoever are listening to this one. He's an author, former senator, media personality, and he's involved in several innovative business startups in the field of environmentally harmonious development, technology, security, and media. Dr. Mayhew served as an independent senator in TNT and has also served as vice chair of the Constitutional Reform Subcommittee of the Vision 2020 and on the President's Committee for National Self-Discovery. Dr. Mayhew formerly lectured at the University of West Indies in Trinidad and Jamaica and was also a founder of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. He has been ranked in the top 0.5%, yes, that's correct, top 0.5% of academics searched in the world on the website academia.edu. He is the author of Politics in a Half-Made Society, Trinidad and Tobago, and co-author of Democracy and Constitution Reform in Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Mayhew has the unique honor of being the only West Indian to have launched a book in the UK House of Commons in Westminster. He has appeared extensively in radio, television, newspapers, in Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, on the BBC, in the New York Times, Mauritius, Singapore, and whatnot, in addition to addressing various United Nations and Commonwealth bodies. And true to his multifaceted personality, Kirk Mayhew also happens to be the host of Independent Thought and Freedom podcast with a unique focus on regional and global politics and polity. So it gives me immense pleasure to welcome my friend, Dr. Mayhew. Kirk, one more thing before you come in, let me wish you a very, very, very happy birthday. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it right. This is his birthday, and you know what? This is his 50th happy birthday. So congratulations, my friend. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Kirk. So tell me, how does it feel to be 50? Tell me something more about your life and background.
Yeah, well, being 50, I don't necessarily, take these milestones as it is. I always have such a intellectual view on these sorts of things because there's, 50 solar years, and then you have your other types of years and whatnot. But of course, it's an important development. And one of my favorite authors and thinkers ever since I was a teenager is George Orwell. And one of his one of my favorite quotes of his was that he wrote it in his diary shortly before he died. He said, "At 50, everyone gets the face he deserves." Oh, yes. And for me today, that has a special significance, but it's a very important quote. It's very important because what it means is that the choices you make in life matter, and that the choices you make manifest themselves physically.
Oh, yeah.
And not only do they manifest physically, you carry them visibly. So I think it's something very important because we have to live our lives in the recognition that we are constantly making choices. And that many of these times, these are moral choices. And I think that the absence in the modern world of thinking about morality and the soul in particular is something that is to the great detriment of individual persons and the society as a whole.
Oh yeah, that's really deep. And yes, the saying is also very, very deep. So you are 50 today. Can you tell us something more about your family background and how you were raised, where were you raised, and what all that you kind of learned and gathered during the course? And then we go deep into your other stories.
Sure. I suppose I'm a true child of globalization. That on the one hand, in my ancestral background, if people have studied globalization, I'm not sure about the audience you have here, but in the sort of more intellectual sort of egghead bookish types that I'm used to speaking to sometimes. People have talked about globalization properly starting in the 19th century. It probably goes back way before, but there was a rapid phase of globalization in the 19th century, and that was part of British colonialism in particular. And so my family come from India, mainly the Bihar region, UP, UP, Bengal, that area, UP, Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand, what is today Jharkhand, but that didn't exist at that time.
Yeah.
So during the whole the East India Company rule of that place and devastating the economy of that region, there was a lot of destitution that was brought about. They're turning one of the richest areas in the world into one of the poorest, into a basket case, really. But and so there was at the same time, slavery had ended in the British Empire, right? Not in America, not in the Spanish Empire, whatever, but Britain in its colonies ended slavery. And the planters in Mauritius, in the West Indies, the sugarcane planters in particular, they didn't really want to deal with wage labor, and they wanted another form of bonded labor that could work now that slavery had been abolished. So there was a grand scheme of recruiting Indian indentured labor to work on these plantations in Mauritius, in Fiji, in Trinidad, in Guyana. So those are the four major places, but other places too: Jamaica, St. Lucia, South Africa, etc. But so my family ended up in Trinidad. We've been there 6 generations now. However, and we established a very strong Indian community in the Southern Caribbean, meaning Trinidad, Suriname, Guyana. So there's a strong Indian community there that's been there for over a century and a half. That is actually not very well known to many people, but it is a very, very strong place. And we've produced people like V.S. Naipaul and Chetty Jagan and cricketers and all sorts of things.
Vasudev Pandey and
yes, our
and so many big
Prime
cricketers,
Minister.
right?
And now, so there's that. But then, so my own personal history gets to a more recent phase of globalization, which is when after the United States and the Western countries sort of opened themselves up to immigration from the third world, let's say, from developing countries, from newly independent countries. And so my parents migrated to the United States, where I was actually born, and then to Canada. And I actually grew up in Canada. My first 20 years were in Canada. And, most of my mother's family migrated. That's her 10 brothers and sisters. And we lived very close to each other. I call it a Trinidad colony up in Toronto. Because we've reproduced Trinidadian life in a lot of ways up there, and you see it in New York, in London, in Miami. Those are our major Trinidad colonies. We have carnivals there, and now we have a Diwali Nagars coming up there. There's a phenomenon in Trinidad called Diwali Nagar, where 1 week before Diwali, there's there's a place we call it a nagar. It's not really a village, but it's a big. It's like a very big mela, right? It's a very big festival, and people from all over the country go there. I would say, it's massive. I mean, we're an island of 1.3 million people, and I would estimates have been 400,000 people come out to this thing. It's a massive thing. It started up in the 80s, and it's an institution, and it's now being spread globally. There are Diwali Nagars happening in New Jersey and New York. I believe in Toronto as well. I believe in Miami, and again, so Trinidad is very interesting itself, being a sort of exporter of culture. Like many people around the world might know of roti because of Trinidadian entrepreneurs who would have established roti shops in New York, in Toronto, in Miami, in New Jersey, and so forth. Just today in Whitby, which is a small town outside of Toronto, I just met somebody, a white Canadian, and she found out I was from Trinidad, and she said, "Oh, she loves roti," because she knows that is.
So, as a matter of fact, you're right now. You're speaking with me from Toronto, where you have gone there to celebrate your special day with your parents, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And so you were not born in Trinidad and Tobago. You were born
That's
in the
correct.
United States.
But what I did when I was about 20, I left. I made a decision not to stay here and to go back to Trinidad. And it was really part of my commitment to both development, global development, and a commitment to nationalism and helping the country of my birth. To tell you the truth, at the time I was also thinking of whether I should go to India. But I did want to leave Canada. Right. At the time, I was very much into many radical left-wing political movements and also social justice movement. I was very interested in, and I was awakened to all the things that were going on in the world. So for me, it was in the 1980s, and there were things going on in El Salvador, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. There was the whole thing about the arms race between the Soviet Union and America, and there were all these global issues that I was awakened to, and then I got into Malcolm X, and this was before Malcolm X was popular. So he was a very, very obscure figure at the time because he was considered very dangerous, and I could see why. And he really awakened a nationalist spirit in me, and I realized how much I personally, in my mind, had been colonized in so many ways, and that I had been alienated from my own past and upbringing and so forth. And so I was, although we did have I did have a strong Trinidadian consciousness, but then at a certain point, to fit in to the society, especially as a teenager, and you have all the all the insecurities and things that happen to every teenager, and how you fit in and all this sort of thing. I sort of marginalized all that, and then I realized I really think it I really think it's psychologically unhealthy. That is my own personal.
So this is how politics came about, right? This is how you got into politics. How has been the political journey?
Yeah, I mean, I was that actually came, and again, these are when I talk about the choices made in life and so forth. I guess these are things because I was actually raised a Catholic. Although my mother's family was Hindu, my father's family was Catholic, and I was raised a Catholic. I mean, I went to Catholic school, and it really changed me in a lot of ways, because when the Catholic school that I went to was very much into Liberation Theology, and which was looking at how Jesus would act in today's world, in the modern world, and he would, and they are of the view that he would side with the poor and the oppressed and the marginalized, just as he did 2,000 years ago. And so they made us, so they made me conscious of all that, because I was into art, and science, and those types of things. Computers, I loved computers, and I never knew about the news and current events or politics or anything like that. I didn't care about it, and they themselves in the religion department were so passionate about it. Every morning they used to have these vigils. They used to hold up these signs of protests about all sorts of things, including, pro-life things, against abortion, and against, there was a plant in Toronto that was making warheads for nuclear missiles or cruise missiles, and they were protesting that, and apartheid, and all these sorts of things, companies that were investing in South Africa. And that just really awoke something in me, and I was so inspired by that. So I never turned back from that. And although I never wanted to really get into formal politics, I was always into the radical political people, and all these activists, and not presidents and MPs. I always thought they were a waste of time, right? So in the formal, but in the people who really sort of changed people's minds and consciousness and stood up and protested, those are the things that really inspired me. And when I, when I decided I would go to Trinidad, what was really amazing for me was not only the way I fit in, and I mean, we used to go to Trinidad all the time, so it wasn't strange for me. Every holiday we took was to Trinidad, except once we went to Disney World.
For you, it was not strange. A question that was coming to my mind is, to be honest, I tell you what, I didn't want to talk too much about politics, but when you're talking to a politician, what else will you talk?
Yeah,
you cannot get away with that.
Yeah.
So you cannot get away from that. So now the thing is, it's very interesting because politics is also a very, very important part of human society and human life, because it's very, very integral to that. So it makes sense. There could be a lot of learnings from politics that people can take, and especially youngsters coming in politics, trying to make a mark there. What would you like to tell them? And before that, the question was that you were born and raised somewhere else, right? So when you came into TNT, even though you were traveling frequently there and all that, but how did people accept you, and how difficult or easy was your integration into politics there? Because you ended up being a senator, so you obviously won some elections and all. So how was that? Must have been interesting, and what were your learnings from that?
Yeah. I mean, and I'll tell you, I mean, even, my parents didn't believe I would go back. People would say I'm crazy. Everyone is leaving the country, and why am I going back? And so, but again, that's my consciousness was different in the choices I decided to make. But yeah, but going back, I mean, there is in the West Indies, there's a lot of migration, right, back and forth, right? So everybody has family outside, right? I don't think there's a single family that does not have someone who lives outside of the West Indies as well, right? So there's people are sort of used to the in and out thing there, but I mean, and there are other people who have, there was another colleague of mine who was born in the UK, and he returned to politics and was a minister. And I mean, it's common. Our first prime minister spent so many years, and although he was born in Trinidad, but he spent so many years in the US as a intellectual of global importance. And then when he came back to fight a movement, and we have a lot of people like that. So that's part of it. But there is, and here's a very interesting
any challenges thing. Did you face any challenge in terms of acceptance? While it made it easier, as you rightly said, that since it's a very fast moving community, everybody has somebody outside, so they do not consider you as an outsider. Were you ever considered as an outsider?
To some extent, yes and no. And I mean, a lot of people some people don't realize, still don't, they might think I spent a lot of time and came back, or there are some people in the country who adopt a certain accent because they want to appear. So sometimes they think I'm that kind of a person. I'm trying to put on an accent or something. So sometimes they think I'm one of these elite people who are trying. But here's another thing. I was telling you that I believe we have a colony here now. although Trinidad is a small country, it is incredibly diverse. It is amazingly diverse for a small country, and and there are some people who are so ignorant about cultures in different parts of the same island. It's a small island, only 5,000 square kilometers, but so there are things that I grew up with in Trinidad, in Toronto, that are Trinidadian, but but from the south of the island, which is not part of the capital, and where I went to live in the north of the island. They didn't know a lot of the things. So there were certain foods, right, that you might know as someone from Bhojpuri background. We call it kachori, baigani. You know what kachori is?
Yeah,
right?
I mean, correct. I don't know whether I told you. I also happen to come from Bihar. My roots are there. My parents are still there. Now I happen to live and I'm settled here in Switzerland. But yeah, my roots are in Bihar. So
right.
I was born and brought up there. I lived that place about 30 years back, but I was still. I have a lot of memories. I keep going.
Right. So you know what kachori is?
Right. Absolutely.
Oh, very good. Because a lot of Indians don't know what it is either, right? So a lot of people from Mumbai or Tamil, because India is so much huge.
Yeah, so huge and diverse.
But even Trinidad, things that I grew up with normally in Toronto, in my Trinidad community, they didn't know. So here I was teaching people in Trinidad about Trinidad, aspects of Trinidad culture that they didn't even know about. So there was that strange. And then, my family is from the south of the island, and I was in the north, and you had a lot of that. So I mean, so even there was that sort of alienness in any case. So had I been so my family, didn't know that area where I was working. In fact, I was working in the sort of slums of around the capital city. Right after we had an attempted coup. So it was a kind of, the slums, being a poor, crime-ridden place and so forth, with mainly Afro-Trinidadians there, and I'm from an Indian background. So, so there's a lot of cultural differences, geographical difference, all these sorts of things. So my family were even scared. A lot of my family who lived in Trinidad never, ever, ever, ever went to those places I went to, right? So, I mean, so I ended up, having a lot of knowledge about the place that native Trinidadians did not have. You understand?
Because you went to the roots. You went to the
That's
roots,
right. And I also, because I went there as part of a university program, so I was doing research as well. So, and I traveled in all these remote villages throughout the country, and I was doing research on development, and in particular with this NGO I was working with. So I ended up knowing so much more of the country than so many people who actually were born and grew up there. So there was that curious thing, and I ended up lecturing at the university there, so as a lecturer, and so people would, there are, many foreigners who are there at the university, and then even people who are from there, they would go study abroad and come back to the university. So, I was in, very sort of international kind of climates, and the Caribbean itself is a very it's a very international place.
Right. Very cosmopolitan sort of.
Yes, it's not like a place like India where you have where you have millennia of history there. People who most of us who have been in the Caribbean, were brought very recently when you look at, the span of global history, to work on the plantations and so forth. And we have our ancient roots outside of the Caribbean. Most of the native peoples were, decimated by when the Spaniards came originally, and then later the British and so forth. So it would be a little bit of a different situation from places in the old world where you have these 1,000-year histories and millennia. 1,000 years is nothing. 5,000, 10,000 people are going back and things like that.
So tell me one thing. I mean, during this course, when you were working with people in slums and going through you were trying to find your political roots. Any incident or anything that you can recall that had a really, really huge impact, or that made you think something differently, or that made you decide on something that, yeah, this is something that I'm going to do, or these days, or anything that you got really, that got you fired up, or that got you very, very inspired?
Yeah. I mean, definitely being in a small, in a small country where people would know me or my family or whatever like that, and so that's one thing. Being connected to a place, So even though I was born, abroad, I had no real connection. Everybody is so atomated, and then atomized. And then being an immigrant makes it even worse. You're not you're not connected to the history of the place. Every place has a story.
Takes time. Yeah.
But every place has a story and a history that goes beyond the life of an individual, right? And I think this is being lost throughout the world, right? The stories of nations and peoples, and the very important stories that I think are being deliberately undermined. Right? But yeah, so I plugged in very much into the national story because my family has a history and all of that too, right? From my great grandfather who founded the East Indian National Association, fighting for the rights of East Indian workers, to my mother's uncles who had served in the government, and all sorts of things, and then, just from life around. And these are face-to-face societies. So, so people say, oh, I know your father, I went to school with him. Oh, yeah, so your aunt works at the she's the operator at the county council. Yeah, I know her. Oh, yeah, your grandfather used to drive a bus here, or whatever. People would just know from the name. Oh, you're related to so-and-so, which is totally different from where I grew up, right? So you don't have these human connections. It's much more human in these small scale societies, because really, society, humans, if you take an anthropological view, we developed in small band societies first of about 100 people. That was the size of a society, and so our brains can remember about 100 faces. Right, and names, and beyond that, then you start to have to get to numbers and all sorts of things, and it becomes faceless. So when you get to these mega cities of 5 million people and so forth, it becomes anonymous and everything. But in a small face-to-face society, you get back to humanity. I believe. You get to human relations. So you had that. Another thing, though, because I was so much into sort of left-wing politics and stuff, and I saw all these sort of left-wing movements. I thought it was so much more, whereas these things were so theoretical when I was living abroad. It was real down there, and not only that, they could really take power. Right? So left-wing groups and things could really take power in a way that was inconceivable. Living in
outside
Toronto and so forth. So I was like, wow, I could be part of a movement that could really take power in a country and shape, and be part, and really be part of it, and have a deep historical connection to these things about, people who I have deep and long connections with, and it just clinched it for me in so many ways that I said yes. It was sort of a test run I was doing when I was working with the NGO, and I said, "No, I'm staying here. I'm not going back. There's no way." I love to visit the places and so forth, but there's a deep connection.
So before you got into politics and before you got into this kind of career, you have had a very good career of. You still are continuing that career of as an academic, right? So. Going through your profile, and you have received so many scholarships, so you have done really, really good at studies. How important is education for for youngsters, for people to grow in life and make something in life. There is also a very good, fab in the industry, and a very glamorized thing that there has to be somebody has to be a college dropout or should be starting something in a garage to make it big. But what do you say about the importance of education and how it has played out in your life and career?
Well, I'll tell you. For me, I am very skeptical and critical of the education industry as it exists now. And I'll, now I really had no personal guidance in my educational career. My parents didn't go to university, and they couldn't help me at all in that sense. I suppose I was lucky being in Toronto that the local university was University of Toronto, which is one of the, a great university, the best or second best in Canada, depending on where you put McGill. But so that was very lucky that that was the university here, and I went in. And I mean, I remember I was kind of lost at first, because I had so many interests in so many things, and I eventually found my footing in anthropology, and development studies was kind of, I was not clicking with it for a while, but when I found anthropology with it, it was a great click. And I remember a professor of mine, when I was thinking of, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I finished university. I really had no idea. But that's why this cooperative program, which was very good, where you had to work for a year in a developing country. I was studying international development studies. That was very important in terms of helping me figure out what to do, right? And that's why I went to Trinidad, and then I realized, okay, that's where I'm going to live. But I figured I would probably lecture at the university then and be a radical intellectual. That was my sort of aim, But I remember a professor was telling me at University of Toronto, he said, listen, someone like you, because I did well. He said, you should never have to pay to study, never. And I took that to heart. And so for my master's and my PhD, I got scholarships for it. And I don't know, sometimes it was just luck. It really was luck, because I found these things totally by accident. It was totally by accident, because I was thinking of maybe working and then applying for a master's program in Trinidad. And then when they sent me the brochure, I saw this other program that was almost exactly like my undergrad, except at a master's level for development studies, and it was fully funded. And then it was with this amazing group of Caribbean intellectuals, and it just changed my direction. Every time I took a degree, it changed my direction. And
So that is a very, very, very important point that
it is.
Every time you took a degree, it changed your direction. So
yeah,
that's what you're trying to say, that education has played a huge, huge, huge role in your evolution as a man, as a
yes, but it's not because of the content. It's because of the people. It's because of the people I got to meet by going to another country, and then it's what you make of it, right? So when I went to Jamaica, then I started to get involved in a lot of things when I was there, and so a lot of with the intellectuals and the movements and all these sorts of things that I was interested in, and so I made so I started to organize seminars. It wasn't necessarily the content, but putting yourself in a new context, meeting new people, making new connections, and then those connections made further connections for me, and it just kept going like that, and that's the important thing. I right now, I think the content of university education is not very helpful at all. I think it is substandard. I think it costs so much. Students are going into so much debt, and then it's sort of brainwashing students. So those things are becoming worse and worse and worse. However, the fact of, and I, my PhD was done in England, and not in London, but in a place called Hull, which is in the north of England, and that's because that's where the MP for Hull, William Wilberforce, he was the MP that passed the bill to abolish slavery in the British Empire. So I was the Wilberforce Scholar. They had a program where they would take a West Indian to work at the University of Hull, and so I ended up working with them. And again, I was suggested for that scholarship by the director of the program where I did my master's in Jamaica, right? So the University of Hull, they asked the late Professor Norman Gervin, do you know anybody who would be good for this? And then he faxed me, because at that time I was in Trinidad, but he was in Jamaica, but he faxed a note to me because I was lecturing at the university there, and he said, listen, would you be interested in taking up this scholarship? I said, oh, yes, I would. So it's kind of like...
It opened so many doors for you, right? It opened so many
networking.
doors for you.
The networking is extremely important.
Right. So tell me one thing. Tell me one thing about, because of your interest in this field, I believe, and congratulations, you have started a new podcast, right? So
yes.
Let us know about that podcast. Let our audience know about that podcast and what they can expect from it.
Sure. My podcast is called Independence and Independent Thought and Freedom. I'm taking off from something called from an article called Independent Thought and Caribbean Freedom by one of my intellectual mentors, Lloyd Best, who started an important group of Caribbean radical thinkers in the 1960s. And in fact, when I did my master's program in Jamaica that I was telling you about, that's how I got involved with this group, because it's people that used to be involved in that, then later on they started this, So this is all the sort of connections that happen. I guess, in life, you always have to open yourself up to connections, put yourself in new situations, and take advantage of everything the opportunities give. So anyway, so this podcast is kind of a way for me to reconnect and to take this into the 21st century in the future. And I'm speaking to people who are shaking things up in politics, in economics, in society, and who really think independently and who think differently and who act on their thoughts. And so looking at the issues, and also what inspires them and what motivates them to take these stands, because a lot of times you have to make a lot of sacrifices when you want to do something different, when you are doing something that the rest of the society is saying, that's stupid, that's crazy, you're a dreamer, this is not going to get you anywhere, just go get a job and do, or whatever, So, what motivates people like that? Sometimes it's things like spirituality. A lot of times it's not. So and I'm interested in that. Why? And not only am I interested in the political question, which I'm always interested in, but, all these big social issues, problems, movements start off with individuals who are thinking about it, and individuals who are making choices, and a lot of times difficult choices, and they make unpopular choices, and I'm interested in those individuals as well. What makes you do that? What gives you the strength to do that? What gives you the independence to do that? Because it could affect your livelihood, it could affect your income, it could affect your job, it could have, etc. So these sorts of things I'm interested in exploring in the podcast, and so I've had some great guests so far. Wonderful. And I look forward to having some great guests in the future as well.
Yeah, I've also listened to some of the episodes, and this content is really, really good. So guys, if you're really, really interested in independent thoughts and freedom around politics and all these things, that's the podcast to go and listen to, and you will get really, really useful content in there. And tell me, Kirk, what is kind of any keystone habit, any ritual that you may have? Do you have some, and how does it really, really help you?
To tell you the truth, I don't have any habits that I consciously do. I probably have a lot of unconscious habits that I'm not aware of. But I don't consciously do these sort of rituals, But I'm feeding. But I'm constantly aware of feeding my mind and soul. I'll tell you something actually that comes from, and I think it stuck with me in my sub-psychological brain. When I was working with the NGO in these slums in Trinidad, it was with an organization that was actually based in the Catholic Church, but we were looking at not only giving these young dropouts skills for them to work with, but also social skills, spiritual grounding, all these sorts of things. So we talked about a type of development that you should always be working on, and they talked about spices. And I think I keep that. So spices, SPICES. So you should have, so you should look to develop yourself socially. So make sure you go out, you meet people, you talk to people. Don't isolate yourself. Put yourself in society. Physically, make sure you're doing something that develops your body. Play sports, walk, do something. Make sure you do that. Intellectually, always read, be intellectually curious, and then creatively, do something creative with the right side of your brain. Do art, music, these sorts of things, and I'm very much into that. Right? Then you have, so that's C. Then you have E, emotionally. Right? Make sure you have a strong emotional. And this was way before they did the 5, EQ and the intelligences, right? Now I'm talking the 80s. We were doing this, and make sure you have loving relationships, and and you experience joy, and and you embrace, even, I suppose I would add, even things like sorrow and suffering. This is part of life as well, and you need
emotional
to be able to endure suffering. As well, because that is a part of life. You cannot have a life without suffering, and that's something that you have to understand. And then spiritual at the end. You also need to be spiritually grounded, and so I wouldn't call it a ritual as such, but you must always be constantly looking at your life and saying, am I fulfilling these 6 things? Am I developing myself in these 6 ways? And if you're deficient in some area, make sure you go and remedy that deficiency.
Wow,
so I would
that's
leave
fantastic.
that advice.
That's fantastic. I mean, that is another tasty interpretation of spices. Yeah. So one should bring spices in his life. So one has to be socially active, physically active, then intellectually active, creatively active, and then emotionally active, and then spiritually active. That's wonderful. That's very nicely put. Nice acronym, spices. So that's wonderful. What are your thoughts about spiritualism? Because I heard of many a times you bringing up this word spiritualism, and to start with, you started something like manifestation. So what are your thoughts around that? Maybe quickly we can take that as well. Yeah.
I mean, that could go into a whole. I can speak for hours about that, but I am a Hindu. I have fully embraced Hinduism, but as Hinduism goes, it is not like one of the Abrahamic monotheistic religions where it denies the validity of others. In fact, all paths to God are considered valid in the Hindu mind, and so that we each have our own special and unique paths to God, and we are essentially souls. We are essentially souls in manifesting ourselves in the physical world for this time, for our souls to develop, because for one reason or other, our souls are in this physical plane, and we have to figure out why that is and what it is. So we really do have to feed our souls, and I do believe the materialist worldview that dominates, and that everything is about money or things or this life is a very tragic thing, and I think it impoverishes us as individuals and as a society, and we have to think beyond our physical lives and our own individual physical lives. We are connected to all, and so our actions and thoughts and everything must have this wider view. It must be wider than just the material things. It must be wider than just our individual lives, and it must be wider than just at this time. We have to be able to look in the past, in the future, at our families, at our societies, at our communities, and we must be developing ourselves within this context always.
Beautifully placed. And that is what you're teaching your son as well.
Yes, absolutely.
How old is your son?
He's 11 years old.
Okay, so wonderful. So, Kirk, on 50th birthday, what lies ahead in next 3 to 5 years? How do you see yourself, your message evolving over next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I want to make. I was in, let's say, in the past 10 years, I was doing a particular political project in Trinidad, and I have basically now turned the page on that, and so I've started this podcast, and I have a television show in Trinidad as well, and in a sense, a podcast is kind of springing up from that, and so I want to start to engage in the formal political process in Trinidad and Tobago more. At the same time, I also want to engage with the global movements as well, because there's an amazing change happening in the world right now in so many countries, and a lot of people are very fearful of it and they don't like it, but I embrace it. I think what is happening now is amazing, something that I never anticipated happening, and it's something that I think is extremely important, and I've been, in a sense, waiting for decades, and I'm so glad the moment is here, and I want to get myself much more directly involved in these things, both in Trinidad and Tobago and in the wider world.
Wonderful. So I wish you all the very best, Kirk, in that. And I wish you once again a very, very happy birthday, 50th birthday. And thank you so much for your presence on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Arvind. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Same here, my friend. So friends, hope you liked this conversation with Dr. Kirk Megu and got some valuable lessons. If you haven't already subscribed, then please subscribe here and be sure to leave us great ratings and reviews and suggestions too, as we all need to keep improving. We need your help to really spread our message to millions across the globe. And please keep your questions, feedback, suggestions flowing in. Put them as your comments or directly write to me at Arvind Achal at LiveLifeXXXL.com. That is my full name, at LiveLifeXXXL.com. As always, I'll try to respond to all of them. So please stay tuned, stay blessed, and please do take good care of yourself and your loved ones, my friends. Goodbye for now.